Before I get started, I'd just like to say how nice everybody's been. I live on the West Coast and I grew up in Georgia, and it's just been a pleasure to be around people that say hello all the time and ask if they'll help you. And not that they aren't nice on the West Coast, it's just a little bit different. My family's from Georgia, so it's always a pleasant reminder when I come somewhere like Auburn. So thank you before we even get started. So good afternoon. Hello. So imagine if you could put on a pair of video glasses or a head-mounted display, as it's called, or use your smartphone or tablet and learn any physical movement or any physical technique better than you know how to do it now, and do it in minutes. That's what we're here to talk about today. But while I've got your attention, we're going to talk about me first. So that's me, the short one. So I was a very curious child and very confident in my intellectual capabilities, at least my perception of them. And when I was about 10 or 11 years old, an event changed my life. I saw a movie called Amadeus. And if you haven't seen it, it's a spectacular movie. It's one of my favorites. And it's about the life of genius composer Mozart. And as is well, documented, Mozart was a master composer and musician at a very young age, like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I'm sitting there in my living room watching, saying, how can this be? How can someone just naturally be better at something than me? And I had a really hard time with this. I just couldn't accept it, which kind of led to an on-again, off-again, lifelong fascination with what genius is and what talent is. If I fast forward to my college years, I ended up swimming in college, or at least trying to. And I swam with this great bunch of guys, and they all were conscientious about their efforts. They wanted to be good, tried hard, did all the things they're supposed to do. And we all finished our athletic careers feeling either unsatisfied with our results or unsatisfied even with ourselves, or sometimes both. And I looked around at other sports, and I noticed the same thing in other sports. And while I was finishing school, I started coaching young kids. And I wanted to give them a different opportunity than what I had, or a different experience, I guess. And I knew I didn't know anything about physiology or anything about training or anything about teaching technique because I was from the other side of campus. But I did have this idea of vision and of giving people the opportunity to kind of shed these titles of talented or not very good, or somewhere in the middle, but you can only be this good, or smart and not smart, or somewhere in the middle, but you can only be this smart. And just said, we're going to have an environment where, one, anything is possible, and that determination is more important than perceived talent, and that great strategy with a great vision can translate into amazing results. Very short period of time, the results started in, and they were either great or very, very good, and far exceeded anything that the athletes or their parents expected, and especially exceeded what I was expecting. And I very quickly realized and understood that I had this passion for helping people do things that they didn't think they could do, which turned into quite a few years of coaching actively. Shortly thereafter, I understood very quickly that great vision without a great strategy yields disappointment. So I started learning about different areas that would develop into a great athlete, whether it was becoming a master in physiology, or a master in teaching, or a master in training, or a master in sports psychology, which eventually led me to being a 2008 USA Olympic coach in swimming. And in that process, around 2005, 2006, I did some fluid dynamics work, studies with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Tim Way, and who has become one of my best friends. And Tim is now the Dean of Engineering at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And what we did was study the flow of water around world-class swimmers. And up to that point, there had been plenty of studies on biomechanical models of what swimmers should do, or computer models of what the flow of the water would be, but no one had actually studied the flow around an actual world-class swimmer. And I don't know if anyone has done it since. And coming out of that experience, I learned more than ever that even though I was very technical minded as a coach, because I understood it was critical, that it was monumentally more important than even I expected. And I looked around at other sports and I saw not only is Michael Phelps as good or better than anyone he competes against technically in his events, but also Michael Jordan was as good or better than anyone he competed against technically. And this was a common theme across all sports, at least that I observed. And I go back to my home club and I bring back the few world-class athletes that we tested, say top 10 to top 15 in the world, and I had this whole other bunch that was between number 30 and number 150. And I looked at them and I said, they're all in this same great environment that we created. And they're all strong, and they're all fit, and they're all motivated to kind of achieve this vision or achieve greatness for themselves. But the one thing that the people that the 30 to 150 didn't have, that the top 10 or 15 in the world had, were subtle technical differences, whether it was their actual swimming technique or the races themselves. And I realized very quickly that even though I was very proud of my ability to teach people, that I was the problem. My inability to teach those nuances of technique was keeping these people who had the same dreams and goals, work ethic, vision, as the ones that were top 10 or 15 in the world. I was the weak link. So I set out, and this actually gave me great pain, as they say. So I set out to find an answer. How can we teach people better? And not just one by one. How could we literally go out and be able to teach across a broad scale people how to do things better physically? So I started reading about the nervous system, which quickly takes you to the brain. And around this time, this was say 2006, 7, and 8, there were a lot of books and publications about neuroplasticity in mirror neurons. And one of them I read, it's called The Brain That Changes Itself by Dr. Martin Deutsch. And I've never met Dr. Deutsch, but someday I'd like to, so I can thank him for giving me a greater vision of experience. And my quick layperson's definition of what neuroplasticity is, and there are plenty of TED Talks about this and mirror neurons, but my quick definition would be the brain's ability to change and alter based on its environment or tasks that are given to it. And mirror neurons are neurons in your brain that are designed or specifically intended to enable you to copy, which will allow you to learn faster from your predecessors. And this kind of led me into some other areas of interest, one of which was what happens to your brain in a virtual reality environment. And I recalled some visualization studies that I had read earlier in my coaching career. And then one day, I was sitting on my sofa, looking out at Lake Washington in Seattle, drinking a cup of tea, and I had this idea. If we put all of these things together, just structured perfectly, maybe we could come up with a way to train the brain directly with movement. And that was the beginning or the foundation of where IKKOS came from. So here's where I stop about halfway through, and this is my disclaimer. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not an MD. I'm not a PT. I'm just somebody who had a problem that I really wanted to solve, that was really important to me, and used already established science to put together something that ended up accelerating people's ability to learn, and learn movement specifically. So I said at the beginning that using head-mounted display, your phone or tablet, you can learn any physical movement, physical technique, better than you know how to do now, and do it in minutes. So we do this with an audio-visual combination, where the audio focuses and relaxes your brain and gets it into an optimum state of learning, and also gets your eye to follow certain movement aspects of the movement that you're trying to learn to help you to guide you through the experience. And the video is what we call an ideal or idealized model. And examples of that would be something like, from a therapy setting, a biomechanical model of a perfect walking gait, so that you could learn to walk better and be built structurally better so you're healthier throughout your life. And another example would be how I mentioned Michael Jordan or Michael Phelps, that you could learn the techniques and movements of your favorite sports stars because they're either very, very good or great at what they're doing, so they're probably going to help you get better. So to explain a little bit about why this works, I'm going to go back to the visualization study. So it's from the 1984 Olympics, so it goes way back. And had a NASA scientist who was working with the US track athletes. And he was actually trying to learn from the track athletes to help astronauts visualize better. So they put surface EMG, SEMG pads on the athlete's skin, told them to sit on a sofa and think about your race. So they did. They sit on the sofa, close their eyes, think about the race. And what they found was, even though the athletes couldn't feel anything happening, and the scientists didn't observe any movement in the muscles because there wasn't any, that the muscles were firing as if they were actually running, just by thinking about it. Really cool, right? Which is really great if you're already an Olympic runner, but if you're like me and you don't have an Olympic running neural frequency or firing pattern, it doesn't really do you much good, at least as far as motor learning goes. But it's cool nonetheless. And actually what we ended up doing is trying to reverse engineer that process. And going back to the mirror neuron piece, I'm going to reference one of my TED heroes, a guy named Dr. Ramachandran from San Diego. And I'm going to almost get the quote right, where he says, "The only reason my brain knows the difference between what I'm doing and what you're doing are the receptors in my skin." Think about that for 3 days. I know I did. So to give you an idea of what an experience would be like, let's say you're trying to learn a squat. So maybe you do a squat and you film it just for posterity's sake. You grab your tablet, put your earbuds in, have a seat, and the audio is focusing and directing and calming your brain, getting it in an optimum state of learning. And you're sitting in a passive setting, so your tactile senses are almost irrelevant. You're not really doing anything. You're just holding a tablet. And you're being given this image of a perfect squat. And if you accept what I said about mirror neurons, what's happening if you're given this image quite a few times, your neural pattern is firing of the image that you're observing. Because my brain doesn't know the difference between what I'm doing and what that's doing. So at the end of this few-minute experience, when you go to practice it, you've already done 20 or 30 perfect practices before you even try, because your nervous system has already done it. Okay? And then we film it, and you can share it on Twitter and Facebook and all that good stuff. Right? So in a nutshell, what it is we're acquiring the firing pattern of a perfect model. Or in a cooler way to say it would be that you're downloading it onto your nervous system. So, just as a quick thing, go through and on our mobile stuff, you can pick whatever you want to learn, and it just has a catalog of learning. And by the way, we have testimonials from Olympic gold medalists, professional athletes, their coaches, neuroscientists, MDs, PTs, and believe it or not, even regular people. So you'll notice, even though the intro talked about therapy a little bit, I haven't really discussed it that much. Because most of the early work was done with athletes because that's who we had access to. But a lot of the research that I was reading was stroke research. More recently, we have had some stroke trials with some very positive or even extremely positive results. But what we're going to show here in a second is our first cerebral palsy trial. And the lead into it is I was in Brazil, and I was speaking to the head of a children's hospital there, and who happened to be an orthopedic surgeon. And he asked me, will IKKOS work with cerebral palsy? And I said, I really don't know enough to be able to say yes or no. And he explained to me that with people born with cerebral palsy, they'll often do surgery on their muscles to realign them so that they have a possibility of being able to walk with a normal walking gait. So, but they believe that a lot of times people don't optimize that post-surgery because they're using their pre-surgery neural firing pattern. And I said, well, if that's the case, I think we might be able to help. So he gets an approval, and then we meet with the 8-year-old girl and her mother, explain what's going to happen, and basically what she's learning is how to walk in place. And this is what we're going to see right now. So this is the before. I don't know if it's easy or difficult to see from where you're sitting. There's a significant change from how high she's able to raise her knee, which by the doctors that we've worked with say it offers the opportunity for her to learn how to walk. And as the video said, this took about 15 minutes, first session ever. What we don't see in the video is, and I was dumb enough not to film it, is her trying to run with her walker afterwards and mom crying out of joy and the doctors being happy. And one of the best days of my life. So in this is just the beginning. We already have prototypes where we have three-dimensional wearables that will interact with your phone or tablet to provide a much deeper learning experience and relationship with your phone and tablet, and learning how to compare a three-dimensional model to what you're doing so that we can offer suggestion of how to learn, which may be monumental in terms of any kind of remote therapy or even remote coaching. And beyond that, we have something we call an IKKOS suit, which you put on and can basically select the muscle groups we want to target. And in this whole process, we create kind of the perfect mind-body connection, which is really cool and a lot of fun. But going back to the beginning, you can learn any movement through your phone or tablet. We can do this today. And my personal goal in all of this is to take IKKOS to the world, to help as many people as possible improve their lives, whether it's in a therapy setting to augment what they're already doing, or whether it's to improve their sport capability to get through barriers that may have limited their progress, or even by allowing people or enabling people to try things and get the confidence to do things that they may never do, like learning how to dance or learning a new sport or activity that they may be embarrassed to do. And beyond that, again, my own personal goal, looking back to the 10-year-old that wouldn't accept that genius is just anointed, taking the notion, or at least a glimmer of what physical genius is, and giving it to the world, and hopefully inspiring people to either recognize that they all have their own inner genius, or even better, to find ways to scale genius in other domains of learning. And in that, enabling people at a broad scale to do things way beyond what they ever thought possible for themselves. So that's our vision. Come join us, and thank you very much.